Mr. Manley, what is the hope for Jamaica? Where is the light at the end of the tunnel?
You know, I could never pretend that I have the answer to that. You know, who has the answer to that? I think that one of the problems here and everywhere has been to see the world as trapped in an inevitable conflict between the interests of those who own the productive apparatus and those who work for it. Hence the inherent hostility of the union movement and the employers, not born of bad-mindedness, born of experience. Workers had a tough time before the trade union movement everywhere in the world, believing that the state was the only instrument that could moderate and tame the worst effects of the market. And then the state coming upon contradictions. So you get a great resurgence of right-wing forces, of which Reagan and Thatcher, you know, are the great symbols. But what has happened in the new dispensation? The world is sliding back into injustice. Homelessness, US, up. Racism, worse than ever. The black group trapped in inner city poverty. Unemployment, a major problem in Europe. Jamaica trapped in social services that are not being adequately financed because we can't afford it, and a young population succumbing to cynicism. Okay. Obviously, you can't solve it by believing that the market, simpliciter, and without balance or control is going to do the magic. It cannot, by definition. It can, left to itself, only make the powerful more powerful. ESOPs, which you know I'm now a consultant for, is a critical element in an answer, where we're trying to make every worker a shareholder in a business.
Right.
If you do that, all of a sudden, employer and worker have an identity of interest. They must pull in the same direction because there's going to be a surplus to share, not to be fought for alone by union action, but to share by natural consequence.
Should the hope also rest in our leadership?
I think it is extremely difficult for people who are currently engaged in the political battle. I don't mean warfare, not like the old nonsense and violence and horror of what went on, but the battle for power. Very difficult for those people to be the source of the really strategic new thinking. If you go back, John Stuart Mill, Karl Marx, Hegel, name whoever you will over the years, Keynes, etc., or even the new supply side, monetarists, they weren't politicians. They were thinkers. They were intellectuals. Their business was to reflect. Their business was to come up with the new ideas and hope that an imaginative politician picks it up and says, "Ha-ha, I see the light.
Yes.
I'm going to implement this."
Yes.
How do you then get to the point where you once again can finance a well-structured, well-run educational system, health system?
Health system, yeah.
The truth is there is no shortcut. You will only do it when you can get the nation to a point of national productivity where your efficiency is creating for everyone now in a system of sharing the surplus through which to have more for education, etc. But if you don't commit yourself to something that guarantees efficiency, not through bullying or rhetoric, but because you've locked everybody into a feeling they have a stake in the outcome.
So it's empowerment, individual empowerment
There's
that
no
has
answer,
to do it.
but empowerment.
Yes. How do you say that to poor people, though?
Well, trust me, if there was a carefully elaborated vision first and set of strategic instruments of implementation, you know, as a strategy, I am sure there are people who would know how to communicate that to the masses.
Yes. Right.
Trust me. What you need, first of all, is the message to take, which means you have to think it through.
Sometimes there's some of us who you remind of a sort of a strong sailboat just gliding through with all of the criticism that you've had to endure. Does the criticism hurt you sometimes?
Of course it does. Oh, it hurts. Hurts terribly. You know, you wouldn't be human if it didn't. I think that I think there's certain things that are harder to take than others. And I'm glad I create the impression that the boat is sailing. Because the truth is the boat is sailing. But, you know, I think that the sails get a little battered every now and again. But, you know, I think that when the criticism stems from a total, almost willful refusal to direct the criticism intelligently to the faults that all of us have, the mistakes that we all make, but is founded upon propaganda nonsense, that hurts. Because you really are being judged, not as you are, but for what you're not. That hurts. And, you know, we're all human, but, you know, every now and again I said to myself, it'll all come out in the wash, and one day history is the greater leveler of traducer and activist alike.
Do you think that Jamaica has forgiven Joshua?
Oh, I think the bulk of Jamaica, if you'll forgive me, this is one thing I'll say that you may get vexed with me over. You go and talk to most of the masses of Jamaica, and they'll tell you they have nothing to forgive. You mean, has the middle class forgiven Joshua? Ha! And I hope you don't think that they are the only people.
No. No.
Have they? I don't know. Ask them. Some have.
Yeah.
Some have understood that they were taken for a ride. Others confuse the fact that as you get older, you get wiser, hopefully more mature, and they think that means there was some radical conversion. And if that is why they do it, because they think, say, that I'm no longer a democratic socialist, then I say, please get vexed with me again, because I still am. Just trying to do it in a better and a wiser and look at it in a more relevant way.
Was it a great misunderstanding, you think, between the middle class and Michael Mann?
Oh, no question. And that, you know, of course one takes one's own share of blame for that. I think that there was a tendency to assume a greater level one of political comprehension that can distinguish between a democratic socialist in social democracy and a communist, and say that they're totally different things, though they may share certain objectives, you know, about making poor people better off. They may share those objectives. I think that I overestimated the level of political awareness and consciousness, and therefore, often if one, in hindsight, had maybe phrased things differently, it would not have fed into the whole reverberating confusion of the time. You know, I wish I had it to do all over, because I think I'd do some things better. But I don't think I'd do anything differently.
What would you have done better? How would you have done it better?
Well, I tell you, if I knew what I now know about the limits to the capacity of the state to just take on things. You know, you see a problem. I'll give you an example. We were desperately worried about nutrition, particularly in primary schools. And obviously the private sector wasn't producing the food for that. So the idea was, let's find some acres and set up a government farm, which can be dedicated to nutrition for the schools. What one didn't realize is that in the end, even if the government farm was efficient, a lot of the product wouldn't end up in the schools. But there'd be, shall we say, an increase in nutritional levels surrounding the farm. You know, but you know, with experience, one would do it differently. So that was one. I think that if I had maybe come out of a different background, not a trade unionist background, but a long background in politics or in business or something, I'd have understood better how business people think and how the middle class think.
Yes.
Would have had a more realistic sense of the limits to the social goodwill of certain groups, you know. that have never faced those issues, that one might have approached in a quieter, more patient kind of way.
I'm going to share some names with you, and I just get your quick reaction. Hugh Shearer.
A very bright person, a very balanced person. I always hold Hugh in the highest regard, because it's really he and I who looked at the union movement for years, dedicated to an extension of the JLP-PNP struggle. And when we began to talk and say, well, what we're doing this for, this is not helping the workers. And Hugh had the detachment and the intelligence to say, this man, let's stop it. And I feel that we, between us, made a real contribution to Jamaica.
Fidel Castro.
Oh, what a giant. Forget whether you agree with the communism or not. Him as an individual, one of the most extraordinary people I ever met in all my life. Why? One, because I really have to take a moment on this. I have never come across a braver man. You look at the average so-called communist tyrant in the Kremlin. Minute there's trouble, send the army to deal with it. I'm safe behind the walls of the Kremlin. When Fidel has a problem, he's there, out to the people, as if to say, if you're really vexed, here I am. Enormously brave.
Farrakhan.
Ha! The controversial minister. I think that people hugely misjudge him from one point of view. Obviously, he's a person who, like all of us in public life, say the things that, you know, you wish you hadn't said, because it didn't come out right. And he has said some rough things, which have deeply upset, say, the Jewish community in the United States, and one can understand that. But what I look at is two things. Throughout it all, Farrakhan's influence in the United States black community has been positive. The people in his movement are disciplined, the fathers are responsible, their sense of community work, either for community economics or community service, is exemplary. And so I see, to measure against the controversies, a man who has been an extremely positive influence. Remember when he said, right now, white people walk past your neighborhood, and they're contemptuous. If you build your neighborhood and make it a center of dignity and self-reliance and pride, they will walk past your neighborhood and admire it. Now, can you be more positive than that? I'm sorry about all the controversy about his visit here.